I think you can read very, very long articles about the season and the harvest. And to be honest, to all of us as drinkers, what matters is the wine. So there will be a much longer intro. I'll talk a bit about 2025 later, but I'll focus on 24 now. Anybody who remembers what it was like in the UK, it was a very rainy spring. The vines suffered from lots of mildew, but there was a lot of warmth in the summer, which was the key to ripening. Unusually, the reds were ready before the whites. What really mattered was decisions on what crop to leave in the vineyard. And it's a big issue, and 24 has been a really surprising year for me personally, that we confuse quantity and quality. There was definitely a big fall off in quantity, in particular in the reds, but the fruit that reached the sorting table was very good. So it's really important to separate those two. And I knew that already this time last year. The Volnay Sonteno that we bought at the Hospice 24 this time last year was probably the best Volnay Sonteno I've ever tasted. And similarly with the Corton Charlotte, the Corton Bressand Cuvée Charlotte Dumais. So there's lots of use of technology, but quite simple things. A lot of it is measuring things properly and deciding what fruit to leave behind in the vineyard, using new vibrating tables before the sorting table. Small scale family producers had a big edge because with the amount of mildew, they could pop out at the weekend and sort those problems out before the mildew had more chance to hold. So quite a lot of the larger producers suffered more because of the lovely French 35-hour weeks and things like that, with people not working so much at the weekend. The small scale producers would bust friends in and go out at the weekend and sort things out. They're more nimble, sorry. The organic producers really suffered because of that mildew, but most of them stuck to their guns. I think a few of them were really, yeah, struggled with that. I'd highlight people like Romain Topinot, Domaine Topinot Merme, lost huge amounts through that, but they generally stuck to their guns and stayed organic. Winemakers took radically different approaches to whole bunch in the year. We had this marvelous comment from Brian Sive at Domaine de Monty. When I asked him how much whole bunch he'd put in one of the cuvées, he said, "Well, I just tipped it in because there wasn't enough juice, so I needed to fill the cuvée." That's honesty at least, but there was a lot of decisions people needed to make. There was a lot of low-level chaptalization. Chaptalization is where you've got a little bit too little alcohol coming, typically if they were coming in at 12 or 12.5%, and they just add a little bit of sugar into the end of the fermentation to bump up the richness of the wine and add 0.5% to the alcohol. In a few cases, I could taste that, and therefore we are rejecting those wines. In most cases, they're cleverer than that. They just used a touch. So chaptalization is adding a bit of richness through more sugar that turns to alcohol. Acidification was certainly not needed. It was a very good acid year, is where you need to add acid to prevent the wines tasting flabby. But the big surprise, and I think this is the saving grace, is that winery practice, once you got the grapes into the barrel for fermentation, the vat or barrel for fermentation, the winery practice was relatively easy after all those difficulties, with wines performing well, some extended malolactic fermentation, bottling being a little bit on the early side this year. So there were a few more wines bottled this time this year than there were last year. Acidity is generally very good, but not as racy and with as high nervosité as you'd have thought. But the wines are riper and have much more stuffing than 2021, and with lower acidity than that year. And one exception, a sort of late note that I literally Stuart and I got today by spending the time in Macon. Our tasting of Macon 24s was extraordinary. They have the nervosité, the balance, raciness of 21, but with a full harvest. So we'll come to that later. I think that's probably enough about weather, climate, and harvest, because in the end, I think what most of us are interested in is not what the weather was like in 24, but whether we like the wines.
Um, That's great. That's great to hear. I certainly, we're always quite lucky because we try, obviously, all the a pretty full selection of 24 wines a year in advance when we trace the hospice wines. And it's certainly interesting from seeing some of your notes and certainly some of my tastings and Burgundy earlier in the year and in October, how the mid palettes have really kind of filled out on the 24s as well. They've got more on the reds, that is. I mean, I think the whites always have plenty of matier to begin with, but the reds have plumped up nicely. Would you, at this stage, be looking at any, or what have you heard from producers about in terms of comparisons to other vintages? Everyone always likes a hook to be able to kind of get a sense of what the vintage is like. So where are we looking at the moment?
Yeah, so Macon, I would say from today's tastings, and we did three big tastings, is the one where you say, yeah, that's like 21, but with a big harvest. So that is really good. In terms of the Côte d'Or, it's really difficult. We always ask producers,
Yeah.
what vintage does this remind you of? I've been collecting Burgundy for 30 years or so now. I'm struggling to find that comparison, Tom. On the whites, there is no comparison I can think of, maybe 2009. But you've really got to think of the post-global warming years anyway, the last whatever, 15 years or so.
Mm.
The whites generally, the yield on whites was less affected by mildew than the yield on reds. Maybe it depends who, but down by 10 or 20%. So sort of manageable. But by the way, when I say down by something, I mean compared with the 10-year average, the last 10 years. But the taste of them, I think I can't find a simple comparison. With the reds, equally really, really difficult. The reds in general, this is speaking very broadly, will come, I'm sure, to individual producers and villages in a minute. They have I'm struggling to find the exact words. I can only use the word sort of suave. They are just ripe. They've just managed to get them to phenolic ripeness, where they are crunchy but not tart, but already going into a sort of smooth elegance. And contrary to your expectation with all that rain and so on, no dilution, very rich, as I already knew back from that Volnay Sontenot and the
Yeah.
Corton a year ago. Very hard to make a comparison, Tom. I would be really struggling. People were talking about comparisons with the late 90s. I
Mm.
can't think of a recent vintage to compare with. I can tell you that they're not like 2021 or 2017.
Mm.
Nothing like it at all.
Yeah.
But they're equally not like the big solar years, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 22.
So maybe it's worth you mentioned the quality in Macon in 2024, which is encouraging because Macon really seems to be coming up fast on the rails as a very serious contender for Burgundy's top region. But um, trying to look at some of the highlights, whether it's appellations, specific villages, the vignerons you've been tasting with, or even specific vineyards. Is there anything coalescing at the moment?
Yes, let's go maybe south to north. So I've already the Côte Chalonnaise, Côte Mâconnaise. So when we're talking about Macon, we've Stu and I've spent the day in Macon and Puy-Fusé. Okay, so I'm talking about Macon in the general sense of the Côte Mâconnaise. I think the south is generally coming up. So Côte Chalonnaise, we had the most amazing tasting. Casenio and I tasted with Benoit Girardin last week. His wines, that's in Sontenay, one of our new producers, who's listed in Michelin star and Michelin Macron restaurants all over Paris, and we're now introducing into the UK. I think it will be our third vintage with him. His wines were gorgeous, Soyer, joyous, food-friendly wines. Um, he's producing at higher yields, but with generous and lovely, beautiful structures. In moving into the Côte de Beaune, on the whites, we visited Jean-Claude Ramonet, Philippe Collin, Fontaine Ganard, to name but three, in Chassamontrachet. We visited Charles Ballot of Ballot in Meursault, who's also doing our white élevage this year. In Chassamontrachet, I'd say beautiful perfumes, very filigreed structures, definite acidity but not racy. I developed this little theory that the vineyards that had clay in them were favoured over those which were more lime and friable lime. But that was rather producer dependent because of the ones I've mentioned, Fontaine Ganard was almost the opposite, that their lime-based Chassagnons were for me were sort of somewhat more filigreed than the clay ones. But I think that's something to look out when you're tasting. This will be a very difficult year, by the way. When you go to tastings in January, including ours, it's not going to be an easy year to taste because they don't have that big fruit forward structure of the solar vintages. They don't taste like ready-made fruit juice, particularly those where producers have chosen to keep stems in. They're not fully there yet. But anyway, that's just Saint-Maur chez Meursault. I think exciting wines with great perfume, filigree structures, good acidity. And then there's my little theory about clay versus lime.
Mm.
On Volnay, it's a real Volnay vintage. We've been to my amazing friends Benoit Landanger at Domaine de la Prousteau and also the inexplicably notorious Brian Sivet at Domaine de Monty. Tom, you've been to Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, our other
Yeah.
big Volnay domain. It's clearly a real Volnay vintage with layered structure, clear, fine tannins. Not those big cloaking tannins that take forever to resolve, but the ones that have beautiful, dense fruit with a tannic structure. I don't know, Tom, what did you think of Domaine? We're going tomorrow to Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, but you've been there already.
Yeah, I think the cooler vintage has really flattered those wines we expect kind of glorious floral perfumed aromatics. So the delineation of both flavors and aromas was gorgeous at Clos de la Chapelle. We were tasting with Pierre out of various barrels. The wines have good structure. As you say, that the fruit is just ripe. It's not underripe at all, but it's just right. They're not big wines,
Yeah,
but
they're not exactly croquant.
no,
They're
no,
not
but
they're
yeah,
not tart and crunchy,
no,
but
no,
they
no.
are just ripe.
Yeah,
There's no more than just.
and I think the thing is that the acidity is again it's good, but it's not prominent. So you've got a nice balance there, and this clear kind of purity and focus, and the delineation of the aromas is really lovely. So I think yeah, Volnay is looking very promising for 24. Mm.
One definite thing I'd say at this stage, by the way, is in these redder fruit years, and remember this is not like 21 or 2017, but it is a redder fruit year, and with the changing use of stems, there's nowhere to hide, and that's a really good thing. In the big solar years, the breadth and depth of fruit and the more blackness and blueness rather than red and blueness acts as an airbrush. Therefore, in this year, 24, you get lots of very sharp climat and appellation specificity. You can really tell one vineyard from another because there's no broad brush of the fruit isn't deep and rich. It's fine and precise, and that shows each climat to its best. Just moving on to Pommard, when I said it was a Volnay year, Pommards, I think they lo the loss of crop mattered exactly where the rain came, and Pommard and Gevrey-Chambertin may be the most affected, and parts of Nuit Saint-Georges. Domaine Comte Armand, Domaine Launay-Oriot, and some of the bits of Pommard from de Monty. For example, de Monty made no Le Cras this year; they just lost it.
Mm.
But they did make Rougien. Launay-Oriot and the Pommards I know because I've seen the numbers from Clos de la Chapelle. They were and Proustor were sorry, not Proustor. The other Pommards were down by 75-80%. Launay,
Right.
so sorry, yeah, Clos de, Domaine des Epinaux or Contamant and L'Orneorio were down by 70 or 80%. So they really lost a lot. What was left, it then mattered whether you'd use stems or not. The ones that had bright fruit, lower extraction stems made a brighter, more refined style of Pommard this year.
Okay.
Moving to the Côte de Nuit, Givre Chambertin, bright, clear red fruit with lovely aromatics and crisp fruit. I put very little of the blackness of fruit and dusty roses and rose petals of 2020, 21, 22. We went to Domaine La Rose. I think we had by far our best tasting. I think Ksenia, you were over the moon with that tasting. They were absolutely glorious wines at every level, and the same with Pierre du Rocher. In Morat Saint-Denis, Roman Topinot, he's had a terrible time sticking entirely to organic biodynamic principles, lost loads of crop. But the Morat Saint-Denis that we've had there, but also at the Domaine de l'Ombre with Jacques de Vosges
Mm.
at the Clos de l'Ombre or Domaine de l'Ombre, the Morat Saint-Denis has got less of the inkiness to it, the less of inky black notes and flavors, but it's got more of the richness and red and bit of purple and black. Lovely, lovely, but very, very sort of delineated. Similarly, Vin Romanée, I've got we've still got 4 days of tastings ahead of us, so we've only tasted some Vin Romanés so far. I'd say good black fruit and good spice on them, good intensity of core, but the ones I've had so far have been more the ones that have got sort of clarity and focus, more than sort of big, hefty robustiousness. So it really has varied a lot. I think Chambol Musigny, we've tasted a bit, but not enough to comment yet. I think Wednesday, we've got a lot of the day in Chambol Musigny and Vin Romanée. So we're doing a lot of those on Wednesday.
I tried quite a number of Jane Eyre's wines when I was out a couple of weeks ago, and um, again, super impressive. I think Jane, as we know, tends to make wines which, almost despite the vintage, have very much her character, and it was difficult to make a direct comparison to another vintage. And I think, I don't know, maybe my expectations for 24, there's certainly, last year you just remember how exhausted the winemakers looked, and
They were
how,
so tired,
it was such
haggard.
an effort. They
Yeah.
really had gone through the mill, and in a way perhaps that slight negativity had affected some of my opinions about how the wines would ultimately be, apart from the ones that we tasted at the hospice. But in fact, I think everyone's really pleased with the way their 24s have now evolved, and certainly with, Jane's wines, again, the mid palate had filled out. There was no shortage of body, and there was just enough ripeness. As always, the perfumes were beautiful. They were very, very attractive. Her Village Gevry is again just a sort of benchmark, really.
And I
So
thought her 23 Village Chevrolet was an absolute benchmark. So
yeah, yeah,
I think it's really important to realize that, when Tom and I and now Stuart and Ksenia come out here, we're trying to keep our minds open for as long as possible. But you're bound to have had this thought, and sorry, I was bound, we were bound to have this thought of, oh my God, it's going to be dilute. Oh, it's going to be very red. Oh, there's not going to be much depth. And then it just hits you with every tasting. Now, a lot of that is an Occam's razor argument because the stuff that we deal with top producers, and top producers make, Tom and I have selected the producers we want to work with, and those producers will work with difficult years to make great wines. So there is a sort of Occam's razor argument. But there are things that stood out. If I move Tom to a couple of other producers, I'd like to
yeah.
highlight. We were with Natalie at Domaine Tolo in Choy-les-Beaune, old style producer, Foursquare, again, Ksenia, I think a real highlight of the week for you, wasn't it? The village, Choy-les-Beaune, some of the Penum Vergelès from there, and the Premier Cruise, absolutely astounding. They lost much less production. They lost more on their crops in the on the hill of Corton. They were down 25% or so. But I think that classic calling a year classic can sound derogatory, but for somebody like me who's been collecting Burgundy for many years, I there's something I'd call it modern classic in the sense that if this year had been 2004, not 2024. I don't mean the vintage, I mean the advances in technology and winemaking, old vines, young winemakers, as Tom and I always say. It would have been a disaster. They wouldn't have managed with this crop. But what they made at Tolo Beau, they are quite sort of old school in the way they do things, is just beautiful airy wines. Sorry, airy sounds that they were light. Wines that had perfume delicacy but stuffing underneath them. The other one I'd highlight, you know who I'm about to say, Tom, Philippe Paquelet.
Yeah.
How the hell he manages to every year follow the same recipe, or he says the same recipe, and make this extraordinary wide range of wines, 30 something wines we tasted on last Friday, and each of them with uh, a joy to them and an elegance. And all of his wines are 100% whole bunch. Whereas, for example, to name another one, Domaine de la Pousse d'Or, all 100% destemmed.
Stemmed. Yeah.
We go to the extremes there, but yet Pacolet managed to make an extraordinary set of wines. I,
Any particular highlights you'd pick up personally there?
I'm going to go through my notes and I'm going to quickly pull my notes up. I hope you can still
This
see.
was this was on Friday, was it?
This was on Friday and there were 30 something wines. So I'm
Ksenia, were you still there on Friday, or had you had to hightail it back to London by then?
No, I was wait, when did no, I left on Thursday.
Oh,
yeah,
you left on Thursday. Okay, so you
I
you,
left
left
I
me.
left
can't,
last
you
Thursday.
didn't
Yeah,
taste
yeah, yeah.
Packley. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So I missed
highlight.
Bacalet, unfortunately.
Yes. So highlights. You're going to love this. So firstly, his Moulin à Vent and Cornas were
Mm.
not affected. 24 had full crop in the Rhône and in Moulin à Vent. These were excellent. His village Pommard was amazing. So there you are. There's Pommard. His Vin Romanée, the Petit Mont, the Chaume, which is between La Tâche and Malconsor,
Mm.
were fantastic. And then his Echezeaux, for those of you who've got deep pockets, his Echezeaux was absolutely astounding. That's why when I said I haven't tasted that much in Vin Romanée, we have done a bit because he has a village Vin Romanée, uh, two Premier Crus, and then well, Echezeaux isn't Vin Romanée, but it's right next door. So Pacolet as usual made a really good showing there.
Nice. In terms of again, I think people like to know, if possible, how the vintage compares to others with established. That's very, very difficult this year because it's so heterogeneous. The other thing, of course, the big elephant in the room is pricing. Not that the producers will ever say much, but did you get a sense from the people you were talking to, what's going to happen regarding the market?
Yeah, so I think the poison of Bordeaux en primeur and the con of believing that particularly in years and vintages like 21 and 22, which were the sort of peak of irrationality, that putting up the prices every year is it's an irrational exuberance that ultimately we as consumers of wine want to feel we're buying a future that has some value, both in scarcity and in financial value, that we're then providing the cash flow to the producers early, and they will through that give us the best price. Of course, if the price goes down by 20% after en primeur, you know, you and I lose, I'm a wine buyer as well. I'm a wine collector as well. We lose confidence in that idea of en primeur. I think the poison of Bordeaux has been understood, the effect it's had on Burgundy. And let's be honest, that Burgundy prices en primeur have shot up over the years. The correction of prices in Burgundy started 2 years ago. They stayed stable-ish from 21 to 22. There was still some creep upwards, but not as much as Bordeaux. 23 saw stability. And I remember this time last year showing, oh no, sorry, not this time last year, at the 67 Pall Mall and Value Villages of Burgundy tastings, showing how prices had got come off the peak a bit on Primeur, and we were actually dealing with producers, quite a few of whom had brought prices down by 5–10%. Burgundy works differently from Bordeaux in that by the time there's a 2 year cycle, not a 1 year cycle. So Bordeaux 24 was released in May 25, but Burgundy 24 was released in January 26, or coming up now, where there's already knowledge of what 25 looks like. Yields in 25 were only just a bit more than in 24, but for different reasons. The long warm summer, in particularly June and August, led to shrinking of the Pinot Noir grapes, which meant that there was less red produced, but nevertheless very high quality, as we'll come to when we talk about the Hospice. So I don't have the picture to show you of the one I always take, Tom, of the cellar, the L-shaped two cellars at Domaine de l'Ombre, where you can see what this year and the year before in one, but there's not much more 25. There's a bit more, but not a lot more than there was 24. I think what that's saying is that prices will probably be more or less the same as 23, where there is 23 is improving no end. There was lots of 23, but it was very high quality. And there was enough that producers were able to stockpile, to hold a bit back. But 24 and 25 were well below average. I think Jacques de Vosges said to us it was 30% above 10-year average in 23, and then 45% below in 24 and in 25. I think maybe 40% below in 25. So what that means is they're now running out of juice. The 23s are looking better and better. We've had some recently. They really are glorious, glorious wines. And I think what that means is that people will sell off remaining 23s and try and keep prices fairly stable for 24. I think they're sort of hoping also that inflation in France and the UK and so on will catch up with them a bit, because of course stable prices for them means decreased prices with inflation.
It certainly appears that for those producers who have lost a considerable proportion of their potential yield, 50% or more, there has clearly been talk that it'll be a small release, and allied to that, they will release some more of back vintages, be it the extra 23 because that was bountiful, 22 was quite bountiful. We'll see. So I suppose one thing for our listeners here to bear in mind is that it will be a small vintage, it will be a small campaign potentially in terms of volume, but the growers knew this, and so they have kept back some 23, some 22, and I think there'll be a second release of a number of these wines, which is encouraging because those are very, very good and actually beginning to show their true merits as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, fill your boots on 23s. I think after 22, people sort of had a view a little bit that 23 was a good year but missable. I thought 23 was brilliant, and they've improved from what I thought. The thing with 24 is that it's unexpectedly good in a different way. It's a different type of Burgundy. But 23 was solar but not solar. It was hot, but the wines are fresh.
Yeah.
And they are filling out really already. They're starting to fill out very nicely now.
Before we move on, just wondering, does anyone have any comments? You can shout them out, or just put some comments in the chat. Anything you'd particularly like to delve into on the 24 vintage? Any particular producers or favorite wines, or anything like that? If you can't think of anything immediately, fine, but have a think. Please do.
Do ask questions. I mean, maybe just to give a bit of structure, because we didn't give it at the beginning. Why Tom and I feel that what we're doing at Honest Grapes is a bit different is that we have got these very long relationships with about 30 producers, and it's crept up a bit as we grew, but we're really trying to keep it focused. so that year after year, between us this year, we have visited almost all of those producers. Between Tom and I, we're out at least 3 or 4 times a year. And so we're really trying to develop a small number of very deep relationships with producers who are high in quality and low in BS, rather than being a big old merchant that has to have 200 different producers and many thousands of wines. Because for me, that knowledge of exactly what they're doing is more important over time. And Burgundy is a place where you need depth, not just breadth.
Just turning to Nick's comment there about will producers be in a loss-making position for the 24 vintage, which was the case for. Well, I think firstly, I wouldn't make the comparison between Bordeaux
Yeah, it's not the
and
same.
Burgundy
Yeah.
because I think Bordeaux's really had chickens coming home to roost for quite some time, and if you look at the cost base for Bordeaux and the sheer volumes, it's a very different sort of operation. There's no denying that smaller growers will definitely find it tough. Ultimately, we are talking about farmers at the end of the day, and they have considerably less crop in most cases. However, the prices of Burgundy have been such that there's a bit of cash left in the bank, but I definitely think it's going to be a lean year, and then with 25 not being much bigger, it's not going to be the time, put it that way, to being asking for sort of discounts on your Burgundy parcels,
Mhm.
because we won't be able to give them, and we certainly won't be able to ask our growers to sort of take
Mm.
anything on the chin. It's certainly going to be a tough year for them.
Yeah, Nick, the difference is that remember what I said about it's not really about the vintage of 2004 versus 24, but it's more like the time elapsed. When people say the wine is better every year, that's not just people like us shilling or hyping the vintage. Genuinely, the wines are better each year. And had it been 20 years ago, 2024 would be a washout. Here I am. I'm actually really bouncy. I will be buying a lot of 24 myself because it's just the type of taste I like, and it's very different. And I like vintages that are different. But had they not been able to cope with that not being able to cope with that weather, they would have had much more of a disaster than they've got. The other big difference, and it's we won't be able to cover this in an hour, is the problem in Bordeaux has, particularly we saw from the trip we made with the Trop Blanc Mondeau Syndicate in May, Tom, is that the estates who've had huge investment from the big insurance companies and LVMHs and people like that who've invested tens and hundreds of millions of euro in huge new wineries. All of us are business people. We know that they're having to depreciate those wineries and get the money back from them. And if they do it on a weak vintage, it's very hard to charge the price. That's coming home to roost a bit in Burgundy. The big estates who have the big estates who've had that big investment are going to find it harder. But the smaller estates where they're more focused, they're just used to it.
Um, just turning to Steve's question before we move on. Obvious candidates that stand out for a brother's baby year of birth as an investment purchase. I mean, I'm sure there will be. And I mean, you mentioned Pacolet earlier, Nathan. I'd have thought something like the Echezeaux or one of the senior Premier Crus
Or
or
one,
something.
yeah, yeah. So yes, I think something like a Pacolet will be really good for their 18th or 21st birthday as well. So that's one. I fully expect, although we're not there till Wednesday, but I know because of the quality increase. Michel Gros in
Mm.
Romanée. He's got some new Echezeaux himself,
And the
some
Richebourg,
Berg
and the
as well.
too. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and who else would be an obvious shoe in? Vern Romanet Malkinsaw from De Monty. It's it,
Yeah.
it it's a year where there are some big wines like that that'll be great. So have a chat with whoever looks after you in the team, and we'll find something. I think it's got to be the right for somebody's where it's a birth year. You also want to think that you might want them to have it on their 18th birthday or 21st or whatever. So think about something that's got the right structure to be a great wine in that time, as well as being great for the year.
Hmm. We can return to more comments and questions, and please don't stop putting them in there as we go. We just thought as well, very very timely that Nathan and Stuart were tasting today at the Hospice with Ludovine Grivo. We have the auction coming up on Sunday, and a few spaces left in the barrel to fill. Not many, I'm glad to say, but a few spaces. Obviously, most people will be talking about the 24 vintage, but as it's literally, hot off the press, maybe a few early thoughts on the 25s, given that the Hospice, the domain of the Hospice has vineyards, a very interesting selection across, mostly in Beaune, but across the Nuit as well.
Yeah. So, and we have tasted some 25s in from other producers as well, small number. Okay. So, 25, I've already said the yields were low, but for very different reasons. So, excellent weather in general, with far fewer vineyard issues than 24. There was mildew affecting the whites a bit, and actually also just down today in Puy-Fusset Macon, there was a lot of mildew there. So actually less white in 25 than in 24
Mm.
down in Macon. Again, but I'm talking Macon in the general area, so Puy-Fusset, Saint-Véran as well. But excellent weather, long dry spell in late June, more dryness through to the end of August, and that shrank the fruit. So yields are only marginally above 24. I had the privilege of doing the pub landlord VIP tour of the village of Aille in Champagne during the harvest, and spent 1.5 hours at Bollinger harvesting. A team of 17 of us harvested 900 kilos of grapes in the Tossière vineyard, and the rest of the 3 days I spent drinking champagne. So I didn't do too badly, but the bunches of Pinot Noir were very tight, and but then thicker skins, but had shriveled a bit. They'd lost a bit of depth, and therefore they lost yield. The heat waves, the rainfall, well, the harvest was a bit problematic because we had this in England as well. We had sporadic rain at the end of August, beginning of September. So people had to decide, did they want to get the crop in before those intermittent rains started?
Mm.
Again, when I was in Champagne, we got our harvest in the morning. Now, this makes me sound like I did loads of it. I did 1.5 hours. It's nothing like what the guys have to do over 2 weeks. But it then absolutely belted down with rain, 100 millimeters in half an hour, 40 minutes or so, just in that afternoon, and then had to dry out again before you could harvest. So there was lots of ripening, high and low temperatures, with an early wet harvest. So a lot of the harvest was done before those rains came. Small berries with thick skins, low yields, concentrated fruit. I'm going to give a really early prediction, but it's far too early, and so this is going to be recorded, and you're going to prove me wrong. And when you watch this back in years to come, from the taste of the Hospice wines and the few 25s that we've had so far, there's a bit of a touch of the 19s about them. It's a brilliant vintage. It's got that fiveness to it. The fives are good vintages, whatever. After all of that, there may be less yield, but it's a really, really lovely vintage. Those small berries, thick skins, low yields, concentrated fruit. And the wines that Stuart and I had this morning at the Hospice, we went in with some preconceptions and came out feeling differently. I mean, to explain the process, for each of the three syndicates, when we publicize it, Stuart and I and Tom have set a budget where we say, what, like launching an IPO or something, what do we think that we'll have to pay based on what we've heard about the quality of the vintage, the number of barrels, the price pressures, in particular this year, China and the US tariffs, Chinese lack of demand, and the local demand in France. So we really are guessing, and that's where we set the nominal share price. Tom and Stuart and I spent an hour and a half on a Zoom call with Jeannie Cho Lee, who's the master of wine, she's a lovely lady based in Hong Kong and South Korea, who is the consultant to the Hospices. We speak with all our éleveurs who traditionally, I say in the past, I'm saying in the past, they're still doing stuff for us. Etienne de Monti, Laurent Delaunay, and Jane Eyre, and get their inputs. And then we look for a short list of wines, and then wines that will match our new éleveurs, the éleveurs for this year, who's the amazing Pierre de Rocher from Domaine de Rocher in Givet-Chambertin, who's going to do our two reds, and Charles Ballot of Domaine Ballot in Meursault, of all places, who's going to do our Meursault. And with all of that, we end up with a long list, or a long short list, and then I have to look at the bidding order and what's practical to buy within the budgets everybody's given us. So the tasting this morning, there are 52 cuvées. There were some we didn't need to taste, or we just tasted for fun. Who's not going to have a swig of Bâtard Montrachet, or the new Clos de Vougeot from Faverley, that was the new donation this year, or the Mazy Chambertin. If anybody's got 170 to 250,000 pounds, I will buy you a barrel of Mazy Chambertin for Durocher to do the élevage for. So if anybody's feeling flush or has had a good exit from an investment, then let Tom or me know. I went in with one set of feelings and came out with others. Stu, what were your feelings about this morning's tasting?
Was surprised at how well they were showing at this young age. For the record, I'm not a huge fan of how young Bordeaux's are tasted en primeur, for example, and we're talking here about tasting these many months before then. But they were showing really well, really open, a lot of the wines. There was one thing that Ludovine was telling us was about the gap in quality between the Village Meursault this year and the Premier Crus. I think that came across in the wines for sure. There's some really good Premier Cru Meursault options there. And I was really impressed as well by the Cortons. The last few years, they've made the decision to bottle the Cortons according to their sort of different part of the cru, and that's really interesting because it is a big vineyard. There are terroir differences within it, and that's really interesting to see the differences that are coming through there. Overall, the wines are very, very, very approachable, very friendly on the whole. I think they're going to age well on the whole. Most of those that we tried had very good balance. They maybe won't be the longest lived vintage in the world, but I think they're going to age very gracefully. Good sort of mid to long term drinkers, really.
So, in terms of the syndicates, the Red Premier Cru syndicate is full, as far as I'm aware, Tom.
Yeah.
The barrel is full. So, if anybody wants more Red Premier Cru, we'll buy another barrel for you. Come with a barrel, and I'll buy a second one. We really did across the piece. There's some good choice for us to make. I can't put my neck on the line yet and say what we'll be buying. I've got a short list of 5 or 6, which I'm just testing off. I'm having another meeting with Pierre de Rocher on Thursday. We need to make sure that the wine we buy is one that he feels really comfortable with. He actually broke a clavicle, and he's just been in for an operation this morning. He was supposed to be with Ludovine and Stuart and me at the Couverie. So I'm actually catching up with him Tom. You don't know this. We're going to Chambertin on Thursday.
Oh, nice.
Which is like a festival of the village of Chambertin, just for just for the growers, really. It's not really for outsiders like us, but we've managed to blag our way in. So it's like a harvest festival, but for the producers only in Givet-Chambertin to show their wines to one another. This is 24s, of course, but we'll see Pierre there. On the white, I'm really going to annoy Tom, but on the white there is everything was good, to be honest. It's more a matter of the prices have got very high on the whites. I really want to make sure I come in on budget. and there are a few favourites, but there's a good set of choices. And on the Red Grand Cru, as Stuart said, all four of the Grand Crus are excellent, and three of them it's almost like three of them I'd like go, yeah, obvious, and one I'd go, yeah, I need to think a bit, and that's why I want Pierre's feedback. He likes all of those Cortons, but I want to sort of get a bit of a poll with him as to which he prefers to get, because I want the Eleveur to feel really comfortable with the wine that we're buying for them to mature. I think in terms of shares, Tom, there's four of each, or
Yeah,
four and a half white and four red shares
yeah,
left,
yeah,
or something like that.
yeah.
So it's very small numbers. As I said, the Premier Cru Red is sold out. If you'd like one, but tell us now and we'll buy a barrel for you, or find a mate and we'll buy a barrel for you. The others, I think four and a half shares of each,
Yeah.
and we really value your help in helping us to fill up. So if you'd like, half a dozen or whatever, just contact whichever one of us looks after you, and we'll bite your hand off, because it's really helpful. If any of you have ever done crowdfunding before, being quite near to the line is different from being over the line. So we already have, I think it's nearly 50 people in Honest Grapes Wine Club signed up to these three syndicates. So to summarize those opportunities, four to four and a half shares left in each of the white and the red Grand Cru. And if you just like three bottles or six bottles or a dozen, you'd really be making our day to help us get over the line. If you'd like that, if you got 250 grand in your pocket or a bit less, I think realistically it'll really depend on what the bid is. There were 14 barrels of Mazy Chambertin, which was astounding. And if you want to have a Mazy Chambertin from the Hospice with Pierre de Rocher's name as Eleveur, now's your chance. And I promise you I'll bid as sharp as I can. I measure my own performance in the auction against the average bid for the cuvee. And we generally come in, more or less on there, or 0.5% below or whatever. So we're not overpaying. I take it seriously, and I've got shares in it as well. It's my money as well as yours. And
So
then and then on the
sorry, Nick.
Premier
Yeah,
Cru, as I said, yeah.
yeah. Just again, conscious of time, there's a few other bits and pieces you wanted to cover off briefly, but there were a couple of questions there from John. An interesting one. Well, I'll go in reverse order. John's asking, what do we think about the haute côte and aligoté, which have been getting traction? I think there's no denying that now is the time for those, not only grapes, or well, that grape, but also those parts of Burgundy which were quite literally in the shade, of which the haute côte was very much one. There's no denying that with climate change, frankly, those areas which remain a little bit cooler, often, maybe not so south facing, a bit more shade, the trees, etc., that lose the sun earlier, etc., are definitely benefiting. So I think the haute côte time is very much now. The
Yeah.
number of producers and growers that we work with who are now doing an haute côte
Mm.
wine because they recognize it's the way
Yeah.
forward, definitely
So
big. And as for aligoté, I mean, the
yeah.
Delaunay aligoté is one of our all-star wines.
Yeah, so John, I'd say firstly, I don't haven't made my mind up yet on the 24s, because we're tasting those on Thursday. So, and we've tasted some but not enough. You can hear where I've been definite, but I don't want to BS you. I haven't tasted enough of those. On Aligoté, can somebody in the team put a link up to the Aligoté 23? Because the Professor Fouillard 23 from Delaunay, because we've just taken like a month or so ago. I think they've arrived now, haven't they, guys? The delivery of
Yeah.
the 2023 Delaunay Aligoté. And I had a bottle just before I left the UK, and it's absolutely stunning now. And it's only £102 for six or something in Bond. I can see you nodding. I don't know if you've tasted yours yet, John. They really, really are glorious. Yeah, Tom's just posted that up. So if you want one now, just stick in an order for six or a dozen or something, and they are just amazing. But John, I don't know enough. I'm a physicist. I need my data points. I don't have enough data points there yet. Okay, we'll come back to you. You'll see what we have to offer, and what
Um,
we've just gently ignored as well.
then Another question, also from John. Hang on, where's it gone there? Which was returning to the market, Nathan. I think this is a more general question, but are growers acknowledging that the secondary market is providing a price drag?
Yes.
Hmm.
So this is the first year. I mean, you can you imagine in our position, we for Tom and me and for Stuart and Ksenia, we don't like prices going up. It doesn't help us. It puts people off buying. I'm a collector. I don't want prices to go up all the time. There is inflation, there are genuine input cost increases, but I don't really want to pay for somebody's next Mercedes or Lamborghini. I want them to have a decent living, but that's enough for me. All the grumbling we've made about price increases, that where it got extreme, where I got really, really knocked off. I'm appreciative this is being recorded, so I won't say exactly what I was going to say, but you get it. Was particularly 21 and 22 when there were already signs that prices were overheating. Quality was good in 21 in a different way, but also in 22. But prices were overheating, and we weren't being listened to. In 23, genuinely, they were listening to us and prices were stable and some came down. And the ones that went up, we just gently deprioritized. You'll have seen less. Some of what Tom and I do is about our list. And if you see something not there, it may be not there for a reason. Okay. So we were very strict and we zoned everybody into four pricing categories as to whether we thought any price changes were justified or not. Because we're a wine club, we've got to act on everybody's behalf and buy wines that make sense, not just say, oh yeah, everything's good. But this year, both in Bordeaux is in crisis and has been for some time. But the last 2 years, they really have been begging us. They've been asking us for feedback. This year, this last year a bit in Burgundy. This year, really in Burgundy. They're asking us, how's the market going? What's going on? Why are my wines? Why is it that you can buy a 2016 of my wine ready to drink, but the 2023 En Primeur is so much more expensive? Some of this is local factors in the UK, where the UK is especially competitive, has got trading exchanges, and is especially cheap, or from their perspective, but the prices are lower than in other countries. Some of it is just they've over-egged the pudding before. But the simple answer to your question is, are growers acknowledging that the secondary market is providing a price drag? Yes, they are acknowledging it now. They're struggling to know what to do about it. I think their reaction at the moment is with lower yields in 24 and 25 to keep prices stable.
Thanks, Nathan. Again, just to wrap things up in the last couple of minutes, again, keep posting your questions if you've got them in the chat. But we also thought it might be useful just to do a quick précis of some other vintages which we've been enjoying recently, and looking at some of the wines that we have, which we can recommend from the last 4 or 5 years. I think it's always a pleasure to revisit vintages a year after, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, as often as you can, frankly. But it's definitely, I wouldn't necessarily say there's a pattern emerging, but there's certainly a few trends with regards to certain years where they are in their lifetimes, and how they're tasting now. So Nathan, have you any thoughts on any particular vintages?
Well, there's some specifics that have tasted in the last week and a bit. I've already mentioned 23s are progressing from good to great. I do think it would be honest advice for people to fill your boots on 23s. There's plenty around. It's not a matter of scarcity. It's more a matter of choosing things you really like and you might have missed buying en primeur. They are starting to be delivered. The Corton Charlemagne we had at Rapé was just the palate was plumping. It's a pumping wine. A lot of these 23s are doing that. On the question mark, not on quality, but on whether to drink now, I've had 3 or 4 2019s, which is an amazing vintage. I mean, it's fantastic. But some of them, Tom, I think are starting to shut down a bit to go into a dumb period.
On the 19.
19s, yeah. So I think I would hesitate to be opening 19s on red in general at the moment. On 17s, I'm just picking a few recent vintages that I've tasted myself. We had a Deauvissat Premier Cru Chablis that started tasting very young. Sorry, 17. So a great white vintage that started young but opened beautifully in the glass and was actually quite Ksenia, you were with me for that one as well. That was actually quite mature by the time it had sat in glass, in an open bottle for half an hour or so. The reds, if you didn't buy much 2017 red, find it and buy it now. It's again, it was an somewhat overlooked vintage. It was gorgeous floral notes, really picked up in the restaurants, and it's drinking beautifully now on the red side as well. I don't know, Tom, about vintages you've had recently.
23s definitely. I've been very impressed to see the reds just take on more gravitas. I love the vintage on release, but they were perhaps a touch more lightweight than a lot of the 22s, whereas now they're filling out. So 23 is great. The 23 whites have always been stunning. I think they'll be hugely attractive all the way through. 21 again, vintage, which continues to surprise, take on more.
The reds are
charm,
taking on more weight, aren't they?
Yeah, more charm, more weight. They're just becoming more substantial. They've always had structure and backbone, but maybe a little bit angular. And talking to growers, I think they're in full agreement. The wines were very structured, fine boned, but not the most. They weren't necessarily the most full of joie de vivre, but now they're kind of relaxing. It's like the sort of, maiden aunt, you finally get to laugh at your jokes. They're beginning just to really ease up and show not only class, but also some charm and some humor too. So I think 21.
Obviously
really
not your maiden aunt, Tom, showing class and charm.
no, she's a lost cause, but so 21's really enjoyable. I do think 2020 is on the other hand. I mean, there's such incredible concentration there that the reds, the whites, even much beyond your kind of Bourgogne level. They're keepers. They're keepers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, thinking of 2020, I would generally, whether they're dumb or not, I just wouldn't touch most of them at the moment.
Yeah.
There's other stuff to drink in your salad.
They'll be around for a long time.
Yeah.
And then definitely 18s. 18 whites has definitely have improved tremendously. I think 18. I remember as a white vintage tasting years ago with Etienne at De Monty, and there was this great comment about great terroir healing the vintage over time, and I think 18 was really the first of the big trio of solar vintages, and the whites, I think at the time they showed a little bit clunky. They were big, the acidity was somewhat masked, but now the great 18 whites, particularly from good producers and especially from good terroirs, good plots, are in a very good place right now. Do
you feel that those 18 whites will peak early? I don't have the feeling of it as being the very.
I'm not sure. I think I thought they would peak and go, but actually some of the better ones are still they have enough structure there. It's almost like a kind of like an autolytic bitterness in place of acidity, which is really keeping them going. So I think
everybody. That's the difference between Tom and me. Tom's talking about Corton Charlemagne, while I'm talking about an humble little Saint-Romain or something like that. But
probably your Saint-Romain.
We all have our place in life.
Yeah, your Saint-Romain 18s, I'm sure, are delightful now, and probably drink up over the next 6 months. But the big boys will last. And then last of all, you said 17s are a delight. The reds, the whites, a lot of the whites are still in their infancy. Again, that's such a great vintage. I wouldn't be in a hurry with those at all.
Tom, shall I switch off the recording now, and then because we've just gone over the hour, and then if people want to stay and ask more questions or ask about more vintages,
off the record now, you can say
off the record in the
lockdown
lockdown bit.